on the
You may want to
recording.
check your hummingbird feeder.
Okay, and if we could also ask everyone to mute and unmute yourself when you're sharing with the group, that would be helpful. I'll do that generically and you can unmute.
Just a word about the Kaplan Center.
You're muted, Jane.
Jane, you'll need to unmute.
Oh, okay. I want to start over again. The Kaplan Center is a trans-denominational center devoted to the application of insights from Kaplan and Kaplan's interpreters to the challenge of 21st century Jewish living. So I turn to Jeffrey to introduce our panel.
It will be a brief introduction. When Caitlin comes on, she will put in the chat box the full bios of each of our presenters. One of the things that we've learned is that some of the richest things we do at the Kaplan Center are panels. And when we do a panel, we can't give people the full kavod they deserve because that's a third of the time and we want to focus on substance. So we trust you've read it and the links we've sent, and we'll put it here again. I'll have just a few words to say. Want to share with everyone that's joined us at this point and other people who join later that our procedure, our protocol is to invite you at any point during the talk to put a chat question. We'll try to, Michael and I will both try to monitor those and we'll share them back with the panel. We also have a minhag that we like very much, is that we never kick people off and we stay open at 2:30 Eastern. We stay on for another 20 minutes for a more formal exchange where people might hear your voice as well as see your question. I will put in the chat room, as soon as I finish speaking, my email in case some of you are more comfortable communicating your question via email than dropping into the chat. So I will try to monitor that. It is an extraordinary panel, and and many of these folks, all of them really, are colleagues, and some of them are very good friends. So I just want to make a few broad notes about who they are, what the panel is, and again, leave it to people to explore the individual bios that we will post. I first want to note something about the panel as a whole in terms of the balance of the group. 2 males, 2 females, that's by design. 2 people living out their Zionism from North America, that's by design. 2 from Israel, 1 a Sabra, another person having made Aliyah at a very young part of her career, and we're appreciative of all of that. It's very important to us. I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't take the collegial and personal opportunity to say Mazal Tov to 2 of our panelists. That would be Rabbi Dana Sasso and Rabbi Barbara Penzner. They are both concluding, respectively, I believe, 28 years as the senior rabbi of their congregation, the service. That would be Barbara. And as Dennis indicated, to a smaller group, 47 years at Beth El Tzedek. Very distinguished careers, full of wisdom and experience. We're glad they are sharing it with us. And our collective wish for you is that a colleague of mine is right when he says that this stage of life is not retirement, but rewirement, with opportunities for new thinking, and we're glad if the Kaplan Center can continue to be a platform for some of the richness of your thought and your reflection. I want to second what Dr. Shlomi Ravid told us. In a smaller group, he is perhaps the parade practitioner of peoplehood and he's logged more miles than anyone I know going back and forth between Israel and particularly North America. He has a distinguished career of finding peoplehood as the bridge that animates our Zionism. And I do also want to add of my good friend, Rabbi Gail Shuster Bouskila, who I know as Gail, that she is the first woman rabbi in Israel. That's to her kavod. And she's also, from the perspective of Reconstructionism, the Kaplan Center, the first person I'm aware of to be bred in the bone, a kind of Zionism influenced by Kaplan, lived out at the Jewish Reconstructionist congregation in Evanston, and then those Zionist ambitions fulfilled by her making Aliyah. So we are so appreciative of all of that, and also appreciative of Rabbi Michael Cohen, a friend, colleague, a member of the Kaplan Center board, someone who I hope you're getting used to as I am, and delighted by reading his weekly columns in the Jerusalem Post, his Divrei Torah. We've linked that at the Kaplan Center, so you can do that if you haven't yet. And Michael is a constant reminder and an active force on the board that when we talk about Kaplanian thought, we are talking about a world Jewish community and strong ties to Israel, and not only a new Zionism, but a new Zionism. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Michael and look forward to the comments of this panel very much. You are being recorded now. Michael, thank you so much.
Jeffrey, thank you for your two kind words, and thanks to our panel and everyone else who's on the screen here. So we're going to examine and explore the relevance of Mordechai Kaplan's A New Zionism, which he published in 1955. And it's pretty clear that he was worried about Zionism back then. In page 15, he writes, "The situation in Zionism is far from encouraging." And perhaps we'll explore why he felt that and whether he was right to be worried about that and what we see now. Kaplan, who of course lived for 102 years from 1881 to 1983, witnessed and participated in the arc of much of Zionist history. It was always central to his thinking, particularly as Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. In 1925, he represented the American Zionist Organization, the AZO, at the opening of Hebrew University. And those of you who know that famous painting of the inauguration, if you look in the little right corner, you can find Kaplan there along with Rav Kook and Balfour. It's an amazing painting. Next time you're at Hebrew, you find that painting and look for Rabbi Kaplan. In his 90s, he made Aliyah. He lived in Israel from 1971 to 1981 as well. So Zionism has always been central to Kaplan, and we're going to look at that and explore that today. I want to again welcome our wonderful panelists, Gail, Dennis, Barbara, and Shlomi. We've prepared some questions to start things off. Each panelist will have about 3 minutes to answer. There'll then be time for Q&A between them and then from all of you, and then we'll go to the next question. But I also want to leave this free-formed. As the conversation needs to go wherever it needs to go, it shall go. So having said that, here's our first question. Kaplan wrote A New Zionism in 1955. What is its value for today? Or to put it another way, what did he get right? And the order for this first question will be Gail, Dennis, Barbara, and Shlomi. So Gail, the floor is yours. I need to unmute.
No, I know about it. And then
Sorry.
What is right has to do with what he talked about over and over and over again. And one of the books that that I also looked at was his odd little book from very, very long before the New Zionism, A New Approach to Jewish Life, written much before that, so that the arc here is, to me, is fascinating. And he always talked about the fact that Judaism requires a home for the Jewish civilization. And way back with this new approach to Jewish life, he felt that there was something that was problematic in diaspora life. Now, 55, what he should have given, but couldn't have given Rabbi Kaplan the whole arc of what has happened up until now. But to my mind, and I have to say that this is something that's been a constant problem, and it's hard for me to stay with a book that was written so long ago, when I see what's happened abroad for so many years, and in my own family as well, that the connection to Judaism, and I'm talking about Judaism or the Sankt or the Jewish civilization, is not the same in abroad, anywhere abroad, whether it be more, let's say, traditional places like Europe or North America. But the connection to Judaism is easier to do in some ways when you are supposedly a majority. There are all different political problems around what happens here, but that wasn't what he could have dealt with in 55. The idea of a state of Israel was, as he did. Mordechai Kaplan lived here before this was a state. There was an attempt by him to be here, to work here at Hebrew University in the 1930s. And it wasn't the same Israel that he was talking about in 1955. And if we talk about his involvement in Zionism and his Zionist thought from way back to the beginning of his writings, even in the Menorah Journal, this man was, in my estimation, was right. He couldn't make it happen for himself, but okay, and this is a personal note and maybe isn't connected so much to the book itself, and I apologize, but Mordechai Kaplan was here at a very elderly age when I made Aliyah, and he was living here in Rehavia. I was here. I would eventually graduate a year after I made Aliyah, but we talked about this, and I knew this. And these are things that he, and of course his great protege, the late Rabbi Jack Cohen, spoke about. Well, how are you going to live an integral Jewish life if it is so problematic in the diaspora? And so maybe I have left the book a bit, but Kaplan himself did try. He was brought back to the United States, I believe in 1983, before he died, by his daughters, who just really felt that his second wife, Rivka, could not take care of him anymore. But that didn't mean he didn't want to be here. He really felt that this was an important place for Jews to be. And oddly enough, I saw him as an example for a lot of things. And it made my Aliyah a whole different story. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Dennis?
Thank you. Thanks, Gail. I'd like to enter the question by starting with a question that you had posed originally, Michael, in the first iteration. And that is, what was happening in the Jewish world and in the world at the time that Kaplan wrote this book? And I think it's important to set it in context. Kaplan was writing just a decade after the horrors of the Holocaust, 7 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, in the face of ongoing belligerencies and attacks and delegitimation of Israel on the part of the Arab world. But other things were happening in America. In 1955, in addition to the announcement of Kaplan's book, which appeared in the April issue of the Reconstructionist magazine, that same year, we saw the announcement of the formation of the first Reconstructionist Fellowship of Congregations at a meeting that took place in New York involving 4 congregations, Gail's former congregation, my current congregation, the SAJ, and Temple Sinai in Buffalo. That was the beginning of the formation of a Reconstructionist corporate ideology. Something else happened in 1955, and that was the publication of Will Herberg's Catholic, Protestant, and Jew. That was a watershed book and demonstrated that we were now beginning to live at a time in the 50s of growth and prosperity for American Judaism following the Second World War. Anti-Semitism was on decline, and acceptance of Jews was becoming more commonplace in American life. Synagogues and Jewish communal life were flourishing. But in the midst of all of this, Kaplan felt there was more form than substance to this development in the United States. At the same time, as Gail has already indicated, Kaplan felt that the Zionism as expressed in Ben-Gurion's version and the Herzlian version of classical Zionism was incomplete, because Kaplan advocated an evolving view of Jewish religion and an evolving view of Zionism. And his new Zionism would need to account for the continued existence of a diaspora Judaism in cooperative relationship with Israeli Jewry. Kaplan did not see Zionism just as the effort to establish and defend the state of Israel, but to reconstitute world Jewry. And that would become his endeavor in the New Zionism, in ongoing publications, leading to his last published book, The Religion of Ethical Nationhood, to which I want us to come back. I think that we can say without a doubt that Kaplan celebrated Zionism's monumental achievements, but feared that it might separate rather than unify the Jewish people. And he dedicated himself to that which he called Zionism's unfinished business.
I am really grateful to my colleagues for your historical perspectives and for your personal takes on this. I have to say I did meet Rabbi Kaplan in passing when I was a senior in high school. I was on a kibbutz program in 1974 and visiting Rehavia. I had the great pleasure that I didn't realize at the time of meeting Rabbi Kaplan, but I certainly became a fan of Kaplan's in rabbinical school, and having read many of his books, I will keep my sense of what he got right short, because at this point, I have read a number of his books. I think this is probably the one that is most an artifact and less a visionary text for today. In his time, it was bold. And because it was bold, it was very prescriptive. This is the only way to do things. But for today, I find that it's a challenge to read it. And so what I want to say in that context is that what he got right was very much about what American Jewish life became. And perhaps that is very much due to him and his influence through both training conservative and reform rabbis and creating the Reconstructionist movement. What he gets right is on page 81 when he says the love of Judaism as a religious civilization will have to motivate diaspora Jews. And I would put a period right there, that it is the idea of Jewish religious civilization that is how most American Jews understand Judaism, even if they wouldn't frame it that way, that it is not simply about a religion, and that there are many ways in. He also, on page 101, gives 3 principles that I would say still resound for us. One, reaffirmation of Jewish peoplehood, uniting all Jews, an important principle that I don't think many people were promoting in the way that Kaplan was, and as effectively as Kaplan did, at least for 50 years. maybe not so much today. 2, the normalization of Jewish life in diaspora, as Dennis pointed out. And 3, the fostering of Jewish civilization as countries and regions permit. Those were valuable points, and he could never have envisioned the growth of American Jewish life through American Jewish studies, through connections to Israel. In those ways, he was a visionary. There are a few small things that I found really interesting that he brought up. He had a critique of the dangers of nationalism on pages 110 and 124, which today people are speaking of very directly. So that was prescient. And of course, his critique of religion as magic, which begins on 113, something that Reconstructionists have embraced, and I would imagine many American Jews embrace. And finally, he actually uses a phrase that is reminiscent of the idea of tikkun olam, which is so much a part of North American Jewish life today. He talks about the Jewish people as an instrument of world salvation on page 118. And that those are all areas where I think he understood American Jewry and its possibilities and was able to help us achieve them. So that's what I find right and still pertain today.
Thank you, Barbara. We'll get to what he got wrong in the next round. So I see you've got a lot there. Shlomi.
I'm going to make 5 points that for me are key takeaways in terms of where Kaplan was right. The first is sort of my favorite quote from the book that I use in many of my teachings, that without a Jewish people regenerated in spirit, no matter how successful the state that it would establish and how large a population that state could muster, Zion will continue to be unredeemed. In other words, following Echad Ha'am, Kaplan basically reset the measures of the success of the Zionist enterprise. It's not about the success of building the state of Israel per se. It's about regenerating the Jewish spirit globally. Point 2. Kaplan was seeking Zionism rooted and integrated in Judaism, not extracurricular. Sounds so relevant today. The implication was that Zionism would abide by the spirit of Judaism. The focus would be its ethos and aspiration for redemption. 3. He was highly concerned with the tension, with the ruthless inhumanity into which modern nationalism, I'm quoting, can degenerate when it falls into the hands of power-made leaders. We're getting a painful reminder these days. For that reason, any religion or religious civilization that wishes to serve mankind must first of all impose moral restraint upon national patriotism and guide them into a universal internationalism that would aim to establish freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Again, the emphasis is on values. It's interesting that when I review Kaplan through the lens of current political scientists, such as Roger Smith, they really embrace, but from a political science perspective, the notion of a focus on values and collective identity. I'll quote two short quotes from Roger Smith. No societies can long endure without foundation comprised of varied constitutive themes that overlap in giving support to their predominant sense of peoplehood and basic values and institutions. Why? Because they provide sturdy anchors of morally compelling identity and worth amidst the rolling seas of competitive community construction. They give us a sense of belonging, a sense of place in the world, a sense of partnership in a larger, meaningful collective existence, and its shared endeavors. They help us make sense of our lives intellectually and morally. And in so doing, they help us to cement and sustain the communities that sustain us. Many people are in fact so deeply invested in the ethically constitutive stories that have given definition and meaning in their communal and personal life that the very notion of conceiving of themselves or their affiliations very differently seem alien, unnatural, and immoral. These are not ideologues saying this. This is political scientists. And in that sense, Kaplan preceded by nearly 100 years their observation. Last but not least, Kaplan was aware of a lack of a meaningful conversation and clarity regarding these issues, which is why he called for the creation of a forum to lead the process that he hoped would be at Hebrew University, etc. He was also aware of the different perspectives emerging, those of local nationalism versus international nationalism, thus his emphasis on international nationalism and universal ethics.
Great, thank you, Shlomi. So we have a second question, and then there's two questions in the chat I want to get to, and then return to some of the questions that the panel and I came up with. So as we said earlier, Kaplan wrote A New Zionism in 1955. We just looked at what he got right. What did he get wrong? One glaring one is on page 16. He's worried about the population of Israel, and he talks about it is futile to expect the countries behind the Iron Curtain to open its doors. Now, in 1955, it made total sense to write that. After 1989, it's a different world. And that's part of the evolution of where Zionism and everything needs to adapt. So now we're going to look to what he got wrong, either from a historical perspective or ideologically or a process. And we're going to start with Barbara.
Thank you, Michael. So I appreciate your saying both historically and ideologically, because that's how I see this book. I was glad that Dennis mentioned The Religion of Ethical Nationhood, which I would argue, from my limited perspective, was his best book. And this one, okay. So, you know, it was interesting. I was reading back the documents from the Reconstructionist Commission on Israel back from the early 2000s, and we were really trying to use Kaplan's New Zionism as a framework. And it just showed me how much in 20 years has changed in Israel. And I really believe, from where I've been sitting and also being in Israel earlier this year, that we are at Israel is at a watershed point, an inflection point, and all Jewry is at an inflection point. And regarding what does it mean to connect to Israel, support Israel, love Israel, or call oneself a Zionist. In terms of his tone, unlike Kaplan's diaries, Kaplan is very emphatic. This is the one way, this is what needs to be. And that's surprising, that it's very prescriptive. And I'll add that when I first read this for this panel, I read the 1959 version, which is even more emphatic and prescriptive than the 1955 version. So that's number one. Number two, I believe that Kaplan had this very optimistic belief in the linear progression of human history, and by extension, the linear progression of Jewish development, as pessimistic as he was about what was happening in Judaism. And he doesn't mention anywhere the Shoah in this book. He doesn't acknowledge the economic issues. He doesn't acknowledge the immigration of many peoples. And so in a way, he was perpetuating in this book the Ashkenazi socialist idea of an ideal of what Israel ought to be, and doesn't take into account what's really happening on the ground, which is a difficult thing to do. We live now in a society where you can get news of a particular place any moment of the day and find out what's happening with individuals and their lives. And finally, I think he really underestimated the power of the issue of security to remain in the forefront of Israeli life. And to imagine that a group of people from around the world would decide on the spiritual development of this nascent state that barely had its economic foundations laid, had no constitution, and was surrounded by enemies, and to imagine that in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's going to be at the very top, not at the bottom. So he underestimated that. And even as in 2019, when I was last taking a group to Israel, and people were talking about what is the number one issue in the voters' minds, it's always security, which is dramatic considering the shift in power and the issue that Israel's security is not, some might disagree with me, that you might throw around in, but for the most part, the issue of security is not about Israel's neighbors. It is about its own internal issues, not only with the occupation of the West Bank, but with Palestinians. And that's certainly citizens of Israel. And that's certainly not something he could have imagined that people were even talking about. He had an idealistic view, as the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Declaration of Independence, had an idealistic view of getting along with the Arabs. So, and finally, I do want to say that he was very pessimistic about American Jews, but he could not have imagined how much American Judaism has become more dynamic, open-minded, unself-conscious, and creative. And in addition, how an emphasis on ethics, as Kaplan himself desired, has often become a part of how we think about Judaism, and particularly about being a state that is democratic and progressive. So I'll stop there and see what other people have to say.
Thank you, Barbara. It was wonderful. Shlomi, what did Kaplan get wrong in 1955 from your perspective?
So I'm going to be a little radical here, and I hope it doesn't offend any of the folks. And maybe some of it is under the influence of what we're experiencing here. But I think basically too many eggs were placed in the basket of the state. The hope that Zionism would cure the illnesses and regenerate the spirit of the Jewish people, to assume that that would come out of Zion, did not materialize, unfortunately. And very unfortunately for somebody who dedicated his life to this country. What was to be a mean or platform became an end. We have developed it here. One of Israel's philosophers recently said, new Jewish mutations. I think that was a sort of a mild way of putting it. And basically, the Israeli ethnocentrism and nationalism affected their views towards the Jewish people as well, not just towards others, but also in terms of how they view the Jewish people at large. The regeneration in spirit of the Jewish people is not a priority for Israeli, frankly, nor is its own. And its sense of peoplehood is thin and instrumental. There is sort of a renaissance in peoplehood that we're experiencing here, but it's very thin, it's very tribal, it's touchy-feely, but it excludes any meaningful conversation of Judaism, ethics, anything serious. Core Jewish values have been neglected and ignored, thus the occupation, freedom of religion, asylum seekers, etc. The hope that the Jewish regeneration in spirit would be inspired and generated by Israel, unfortunately, did not prove right.
Thank you, Shlomi. Dennis, what did he get wrong in 55?
Well, I think we need to be kind to Kaplan in the sense that he was writing at a certain moment from his perspective. And his ideas were not only his. He very much aligned himself and perhaps in many ways helped promote the ideologies that would inform Nahum Waldman, for example, in the notion that the diaspora has a crucial role to play in the development of Israel. So I think, and I agree with both previous speakers, that Kaplan has a very optimistic, sometimes naive view of history. That's his personality. He really does not, his intellectual personality. Let me put it this way. What I think he got wrong was that he warned against and he complained and feared, but I think he underestimated the strength of orthodoxy in Israel to grow as it did, and in the United States. Here he agreed with Ben-Gurion. He saw these expressions as expressions of Judaism that would ultimately fade away. So he did not quite anticipate what that would do to Israeli nationalism. He critiqued Israel's founders' negative view of the diaspora, and he saw it as adversarial to the unity of the Jewish people. But I don't think that he quite envisioned that secular nationalism of the early Eastern European Ashkenazi founders would translate with even greater emphasis into the religious nationalists that today significantly hold sway of the direction of politics in Israel. So there is a combination of a religious nationalism that is fails to understand and denigrates, as somebody just quoted, I think Shlomi, denigrates any other expression of Judaism, especially non-traditionalist in the diaspora. I think that Kaplan contributed, even though he criticized, he contributed to the robustness of what would become American Judaism. So he could be, I remember him teaching at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. You would think that he was really very negative about what he was saying, but then at the end, he kind of opened up into an optimistic expression of that which he was himself criticizing. I think we have to understand that Kaplan's understanding of nationalism was one that affirmed national life. He never stood for the obliteration of national entities, but for the moralization of national loyalties. He had a hopeful view, nearly unlike that of another famous Christian religious thinker in the United States, Reinhold Niebuhr, who wrote about moral man and immoral society, indicating the incompatibility nearly of corporate and personal ethics. Kaplan somehow believed deeply that personal ethics could be translated into collective ethics, and that was part of his optimism. Some would say naivete. But that was it. Another thing that I think he got wrong was, even though the symbol continued to be used, the symbol of the hub with Zion, the spokes of religion, culture, and ethics, and the rim around, I think he was concerned that it might be understood to be a unidirectional relationship, because he always advocated for a two-directional relationship between Israel and the diaspora. But he maintained Zion at the hub, and then culture, religion, and ethics flowering from there, emanating from there, and then the wheel being the symbol. I think that he never fully articulated it, but I think that Ravidovich's vision of the two foci of Jewish identity, Israel and the diaspora, consisting of an ellipse, but it's more difficult to make an ellipse rotate. So concentric circles rotating into one another, perhaps. So those are some thoughts.
Thank you, Dennis. So Gail, you get the last word on this round. What did Kaplan get wrong in 55?
It's hard not to say a lot. In other words, I don't mean that I'm going to say a lot. I mean, it's hard not to say a lot. If there was supposed to be a reciprocal relationship, but actually the center comes from here, which is obvious, that there was some connection to this land. If you are, okay, this for me is difficult, but it's essential. If you are not in the position of the Orthodox that this was the land that were given by God to the Jewish people, then you have to have some other way of connecting here. Now, if it's a Jewish civilization and we have always been pining for this piece of land, whether or not we're religious, although it's in our prayer book and it's in our Bible and all these literature, the literature and the historical aspect of all of these things, that what has happened is that he could never have predicted the hegemony of the Orthodox in the ministry of religion. I do not want to say that the Orthodox have any other position. I live here. We stay far away from each other. Okay, I would like to say that what the religious what the national religious Jews did of all the different flavors, I don't mean the Haredim because they aren't part of the ministry of religion, is convinced everybody that if you don't use our system, you're going to have bastard children. And I've heard it up until just yesterday to the day before. I went to somebody told me about that she married her husband because she told her husband she was pregnant before she got married, that she would have a bastard if she didn't. And this I've heard more and more and more. The fact of the matter is that what happened in the politicalization, which he was against, that he was right about, which he was against, he could never have predicted it. The idea of Jewish identity and Ada Gordon and Ahada'am, obviously, it's important, but everybody took it in a different direction. And okay, family didn't come until the early 1960s. He couldn't have known this then. When you have the large influx of the Jews from the Maghreb and from Iraq, you have a traditional society. You can go find that in New York still today, but they weren't the Haredim of then. They weren't even Shas of the 1980s and forward. And what you have is something he could not have predicted. I want to, the gift of prophecy. There's so many things he got right, but the fact that you have a nationalist state that had the kind of influx of immigrants of all different kinds, and now it is nothing that he could predict it. The one thing that also Israel and the diaspora have not really stayed interconnected. I think my parents' generation, Mel might agree, I think my parents' generation, who still connected emotionally, if they saw Golda Meir, if they saw Moshe Dayan, or whatever, that was correct. I don't think that my generation or my kids' generation, who knows what's going to happen? I couldn't say, but I feel that you can't. The prediction, no, he didn't get it right. Sorry, Rabbi, but it didn't work.
Thank you, Gail, and everyone for those. So I want to switch to some of the questions in the chat, and then we're going back to some of the questions that the panel and I had just come up with earlier. So this is a question from Elon, and it's the question about anti-Zionism, which is clearly a growing voice within Judaism. So my question for the panelists are, how do you think Kaplan would respond to anti-Zionism within the Jewish community, and or how you would respond? And there's no order to us. Whoever wants to talk first, raise your hand, and then I'll pick from there. Barbara, thanks.
All right, I'll jump in because this is really the question I want to ask about how we apply Kaplan today. I want to begin with the frame that Kaplan was a person who evolved day to day. He acknowledges that, and I can't imagine that today he would hold to much of what he wrote back then, having gone through what we are going through. And the question I want to ask, and I particularly want to hear from our Israeli panelists, is the refrain that I am hearing, not about anti-Zionism from America, but people, Jews in Israel, who are saying, I don't believe in a Jewish state. I don't call myself a Zionist. I love Israel. I live in Israel. And to be a Zionist is problematic because it so privileges in mind and in practice the Jews of this state. The anthem of Israel, the law of return, all of these privileged Jews, and they don't want to be part of it. If they are involved and connected to Palestinian citizens of Israel of any kind, they don't want a part of it. And I am hearing more and more calls for one state as opposed to two states. And I can't predict what Kaplan would say. I'm curious what our Israeli colleagues have to say about that.
So Barbara, that's a nice segue into Shlomi, Gail, and then Dennis back to America. But Shlomi, we'll start with you.
Well, you're putting me on the spot. It's very difficult to be an Israeli today, to be an Israeli who fought for the state, who was injured in its wars. All his children were in the army. My father was in the army. My brother was in the army. We look at if you want to call what was created a Zionist enterprise, I can't identify with it personally. It's the amount of damage and the amount of pain that we inflict on the Palestinians, the kind of future we're offering to our children, the ease by which we mistreat refugees, and so many other things. If that's the expression of Zionism, then I'm sure Kaplan would have been against all of the above, but I'm not sure that this is really Zionism. And the real challenge is we have to rethink what the new Zionism can look like and can be. I'm going to save some of my thoughts for the last part of our section, but I don't have any difficulty with Israelis who basically say that by this point they are a-Zionist or even anti-Zionist. If in the name of Zionism, horrible things are happening in a systemic way over a long period of time. We got to really look at our faces in the mirror and take responsibility and respond accordingly. I don't want to give up on the notion of an important state for the Jewish people. And I still believe that maybe we can figure out a way of having such a state as a just state, and one that takes, decent care of its neighbors, and so on and so forth. But if what we're seeing as the formal regime and Knesset Israel, if this is the expression of Zionism, it's not my Zionism.
Thank you, Shlomi, for that tour from Zion. Gail, or other voice from Zion?
Not Torah.
I don't want to say that I came prepared, but unfortunately, the last few days especially with the passing of Yonatan Geffen, poet, author, everything, who said apparently in his last interview, I translated. I apologize to anybody who really translated. I've translated because I just wanted to have it. I don't get Haaretz in English. And he said, as a child, I was brainwashed that one was expected to serve one's people and fall. In other words, fall as opposed to in battle. And if I were to go back in time with my current consciousness, I would refuse to enlist for ideological reasons and make a whole ritual out of it. This is a man who was born in Nahalal. You know the whole. If you don't know about Yonatan Geffen, go look just the name up. In English, I guess it's 2 F's. And I've spent all of my career working in the Ministry of Education, the Open University, with Jews and Arabs and Bedouin and Druze and Christians, and I don't know, and I'm going to say this, Kaplan talked about, and I said at the beginning about the fact that we need a home with the Jewish civilization is a majority. I don't know if that's a realistic idea. I don't know if it ever was a realistic idea. I love this country, but I also know the people, because I used to work with people who lived across the Green Line, who were closed off to me. I could never work with them anymore at a certain point, never could go see them anymore. They're right over there because I live in Hod Sharon. And it is a huge problem that and if the people of the other side of the Green Line who I don't know if they're coming, somebody tell me if they know, can't even come to mourn their dead at this time of remembrance of people who, like one of my great nephews was killed in a terrorist attack, and theirs were killed by people coming into their village and killing people. I don't know. I don't know what would be wrong, because I voted for the people actually who put an Arab in the government. I do not see this as a negative. Yes, we may not be a majority, which is something that a lot of people are hysterical about. Maybe because I grew up in the United States and I wasn't part of the majority anyway, that I'm not afraid of it. But this is something that that may come to be, if you by the way, if you're watching the well, most of you don't really aren't able to, the speakers at the demonstrations on Saturday night in Kaplan Street against the reform was a Bedouin woman lawyer, talking about her work with rights for Bedouin women especially. And I think if this country is to be an ethical nationhood, which is the book that I love the best from Mordechai Kaplan, this is a little too early. As you said, his thought changed. Then we have no way of continuing like this. My husband was in the army, family have suffered in a terror attack. There's a great nephew that died. In 2001, my own sons of different varieties were in the army. And I have to say that I don't want this to continue. I don't want this to continue for either side. I don't want any of this. So maybe it's too emotional, I'm sorry, but it's a very emotional period. Thank you for letting me voice that.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you for sharing that. Dennis, on anti-Zionism as a Zionist.
I think that Kaplan would say to those who declare themselves anti-Zionists, and there are different ways of declaring oneself as such, belligerently or ideologically, and with intellectual understanding of the situation, but Kaplan would say the same thing that he would say to a Jew who wants to reject Judaism. He says, don't reject Zionism, don't reject Judaism. Reconstruct it, reformulate it. He would not, I think that Kaplan would remind us that Zionism addressed the issue of the powerlessness of the Jewish people. And in addressing that issue, in the course of time, he would say to us, you know, there were some problems that developed, and those are the problems that we need to address. There are problems with powerlessness, and early Zionism sought to address that. There are also dangers in power, and Kaplan would tell us that those are the issues that need to be addressed today. How does a nation state exercise power in an ethical way? And that was the burden of his second book. I think that in his typical positive, optimistic spirit, Kaplan would remind us that we do not have to reject or deny the good of the past in order to pursue the promise of the future. We have to build upon it. I don't live in the state of Israel. I cannot speak for Israelis. And I think that the future of Israel depends on not only an internal rapprochement among the Jewish citizens of the state of Israel, but finding a model of coexistence with the Palestinian, the Arab population in Israel, and certainly with the neighbors that are not part of the citizenship of Israel. There are some signs of positive development with the Arab world. We do not have to agree with everything that is happening, but it is happening. I think that Kaplan would call us to reconstruct Zionism as we attempt to reconstruct Judaism, and to understand that peoplehood can be expressed in positive ways. There is a, not Reinhold Niebuhr, but his brother Richard Niebuhr has one of my favorite sayings about religion. He says, religion can make good people better and bad people worse. Nationalism can make good people better or bad people worse.
Thank you, Dennis. Some great questions in the chat here. I'm going to try to combine two questions. We may get to all of them. We'll see. And the order of responding to this Combino is going to be Shlomi, Gail, Dennis, and Barbara. So Caitlin asks, how do we reconcile with the fact that Kaplan was against chosenness, ethno-nationalist supremacy, and yet this is a key feature of both the founding of the State of Israel, figures like Jabotinsky, and contemporary Israel? How should this guide the actions of reconstructing Judaism to ensure an ethical nationhood? And I want to combine that with, as much as you want to combine them, from Barbara, how to think about the time when Israel no longer has a Jewish majority, how to maintain democracy then and prepare for it. Shlomi.
Can I go a little later? I want to review the questions again.
Sure. Anyone want to bat first here? Oh.
I sort of hinted at it, I suppose, a few minutes ago, in the fact that if de facto we are for two nations. It's always been that way, whether or not there's been a wall between us or not. It's irrelevant. The how do you guide a state that you are working together with other ethnic as well as religious groups? And that will be whether or not the people here who are in power are wise enough to do it. I would hope that would be the case. The fact is that the minority still is the Ben Gvir Smotrich group that are the settlers. And the one thing that's encouraging to me, which is so bizarre, is to go out on the street, which is for 16 weeks in a row, and everybody's carrying the Israeli flag. And then when the people protested from the Likud, and there were very few of them, they also carried the Israeli flag. I don't know what that means. I cannot tell you right now. I think we are in a moment of extraordinary flux. But everybody keeps saying, we need more Arabs, we need more Arabs. And the Arabs keep saying, but this isn't our fight, this is your fight. And we're still in a dynamic process. Again, if we have wise leaders who can lead us, and that may not be the people that have just been elected recently. So I don't know, but I think this, keep watch this space. It's it's fascinating right now.
Thank you, Gail. Barbara, are you ready to jump into this?
Of course. I'm really glad for Gail and for Shlomi on this call and reflecting what you're living with. And so I can only speak from where I am. If I were not on this call, I would be at a rally that has been sponsored by Israelis here in Boston to protest the current government. And it's happening in a mainstream synagogue today in Brookline, Massachusetts, which tells how much the American Jewish community is wrestling with these questions. So that's where I want to go. And so I want to bring Kaplan with me. So I don't claim that any of us have a facile resolution to these issues. I do want to point out that my goal over the last 10 years in bringing people to Israel and in talking about Israel has not been in supporting Israel as an entity or supporting government policy. It has been working side by side with people on the ground who were creating a foundation for the kind of state that is Israeli and not necessarily completely Jewish. And that's, it's not a large group of people. And I had been hopeful that eventually some leaders would arise on all sides who could lead that kind of work. I still believe in those people. Unfortunately, the current government is seeking to defund them and defame them. But those are the people who have a vision. I had a long talk with someone in my family, and I believe family connections are really key. It was Art Green who once said, it's the people who have family in Israel who are going to keep the connections going. And I've seen it happen, particularly in families like mine, where I'm clearly a progressive and of a family member who's a settler and who has beliefs that I don't agree with, but we are open to each other. And it's important that our kids know each other. So I was talking to someone in my family who's 30 years old, born in Israel, no longer religious, no longer considers herself a Zionist, but loves Israel. And I really asked her some questions about, if there isn't a Jewish state, what makes you Israeli? And we talked about peoplehood being important and talked about how Israel needs to be a refuge for those who are targeted by anti-Semitism throughout the world, which I'd like to say is never going to happen again, but I would be as naive as Kaplan if I were to say that. So those are my two points. One is supporting it, people on the ground, connecting to family. And the third point that makes this really difficult, when Kaplan talks about Judaism as the religious civilization of the Jewish people, religion isn't the only way of expressing Judaism, and yet that's how it's seen in so much of the dialogue, in so much of the politics. And if we were to extricate, I think it was Sandy asked about if there's a separation of religion and state. If we were to extricate Jewish religion from being from Israel, which my niece said we should do, how do we maintain Jewish civilization. If people don't understand that Jewish civilization can exist without being religious as people understand it, I don't know how we create that kind of state, but I'm hopeful that we can be allies with the people in Israel who are doing that work.
Just a second. I want you to unfortunately, for those of you who really don't speak Hebrew, you can't hear what's being said. The majority of people on the streets are secular Israelis. This is still the majority of the people here, and they do talk about Am Yisrael. They do think that way. We are not although I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi, I'm more connected to this group of Israelis. I'm out with them now almost all the time. And I think that we actually have evolved. This is not the state of Ben Gurion. It's not the state of Menachem Begin. And it's not the state that maybe even, and I will say Bibi thought it was, and Bibi's government thought it was. And it is not correct that most people voted for Bibi. And there are Likudniks out there who are secular Israelis. And that is where we are. And the problem is, to be a secular Jew in the diaspora doesn't work. And that's the problem. You are in a liberal community. We are the minority here. If you're a liberal community in the diaspora, you have very few people to relate to. My son, unfortunately, lives in Dallas. He does not relate to the American Jewish community. He relates only to other Israelis. Whether that can be transmitted to the next generation is a question. But in Israel, we have evolved, and it is fascinating to see. Sorry, I didn't want to jump in.
Thank you for jumping in there, Gail. That was very important. Shlomi, I see you've unmiked yourself, unmuted yourself, so I guess you're ready, and then Dennis.
So I don't think that ethno-nationalist supremacy is by design the sort of the root of modern Zionism. There were streams, by the way. I think we need to bring back Zionism as a plurality of perspectives and not like one monolithic approach, but maybe that's a whole different webinar. But there are attempts to create a state that would be the state of the Jewish people and still treat as equal citizens Arabs and members of other minorities. I don't think it's a must. And I think that we can get over. And actually, if there is one optimistic ray of hope in the last few weeks, it's the demonstrations and the fact that Israelis are asking themselves, what are we about? And what defines us as a decent, humanistic, democratic society? And that conversation can be brought up. I want to be clear though about the question about how do we prepare for a democracy where Jews will not be a majority in broader Israel. In my humble opinion, those in power have no intention of developing in that direction and maintaining democracy. There's no intention of giving Arabs the right to vote. And then figuring it out. That's probably what's even scarier, because we're going to design a nice soft apartheid, which we have been having de facto. We're going to design sort of a nice model that we can sell to ourselves and to the world, and we won't have to deal with the fact that there may be a majority of non-Jews living in this piece of land.
Thank you, Shlomi. Dennis.
There is a lot of stuff involved in this question. I'd like to remind us as Americans that we have been through a period over the last several years that was very trying for American democracy. and that many of us struggled with this issue in ways similar to what the Israelis are doing now, perhaps not as numerically expressive, but certainly with the concern that many Israelis have. Again, I qualified that I do not live in the state of Israel, and I think that ultimately the destiny of the state of Israel is in the hands of those. No nationalist supremacy when talking about a Jewish state. For me, a Jewish state, perhaps along Kaplanian lines, means something like an Italian state, an Irish state, a French state. It is a country whose ethos, whose culture is informed by a particular cultural tradition. I think that is what Kaplan had in mind. Kaplan's notion of religion was a non-supernaturalist notion of religion. His understanding of peoplehood, his understanding of Torah was naturalist. And he saw in the founding of the State of Israel the beginnings of the normalization of the Jewish experience. And that is what he supported. I think that Zionism, like Americanism, has to have a plurality of perspectives. And out of my naive position from where I am, I hope that what we are seeing in Israel now is a defining moment, and that there might be opportunities here, just as there have been in the past ways in which the state has evolved that nobody would have anticipated, that we might be seeing the germs of good possibilities for the state of Israel. This is a rebirth and a reaffirmation of democracy in Israel. Where it goes is not yet determined. Many of you will remember that one of Kaplan's books was called The Faith of America. It was a book, a collection of prayers and celebrations for different moments in the life of the American people, written with other people, including non-Jews, to celebrate the ethos of America. And what was Kaplan's understanding of the ethos of America? Kaplan called democracy the religion or the faith of America. So what we need to think about is ways of translating democratic Zionism or redefining the concepts of Zionism, and not shying away from the possibility of a state of Israel that proclaims a historic connection with the Jewish experience, just as Ireland and France and Italy and many Arab countries that have gone in directions in which we do not want to see the state of Israel go. But there is nothing wrong with affirming particularism as long as it is done in a way that involves universalism.
Thank you, Dennis. And to follow up a little what Dennis was saying, on page 93 of New Zionism, Kaplan talks about an Israeli who marries a non-Jew, and then he writes, she'll become politically Jewish irrespective of her religion. That is, Jewish is the nationalism of that is not a religious, as other nationalisms are. So lots of great questions in the chat. I really appreciate all of the interest. If some of the panelists want to respond, they're fine. I really want to get to kind of, I think, the ultimate question. I really want to thank Barbara for this, which is, what would be a new Zionism today? That if Kaplan were to write it, what do you think he would include? And or if you were going to write it, what would be in a new Zionism today? Anyone want to jump in first, or I'll give you 30 seconds to digest, and then I'll start calling on one of our illustrious panelists.
Well, I went last time. I'll kind of
thank you, Dennis.
A little segue here. What would a new Zionism look like? First of all, I agree with Shlomi that it has to be pluralistic. For it to be a democracy, it has to be pluralistic and be tolerant of those differences. It would be a Zionism that neither idolizes nor demonizes Israel. It would be a Zionism that doesn't set unattainable expectations, but doesn't excuse shortcomings. I think it would be a Zionism that does not regard Israel as our vicarious form of identity, nor as the object, especially for those of us who live outside, nor as the object of our self-righteous justice warrior criticism. I think it would be a Zionism that would reflect the early Zionists' aspiration of being both Or Lagoim and Kechol Hagoim, to still have ideals that can impact on the nation and around the world, but to be a nation like other nations. That was the goal of Zionism, the normalization of the Jewish experience. Kaplan wrote, and I don't know if it was in this book or elsewhere, Eretz Israel should not be expected to be a hothouse of moral virtues where perfect human beings are grown, but might well be a garden of human character, which requires constant cultivation, weeding, and growth. The founding of the State of Israel was meant to normalize the Jewish condition. Neither the extreme right nor the extreme left seemed to be content with a normal Israel. They wanted either to be supernaturally empowered or unnaturally vulnerable. And I don't think either option will work. It will be a Zionism that will continue to work for peace within the nation, within all the inhabitants, and across the borders. And it would be a Zionism that would affirm the right of the Palestinians to control their own destiny and to expect the right of the State of Israel, a diverse State of Israel, to live also in peace.
Thank you, Dennis. Gail, what would a new Zionism look like, either from your lips or Kaplan's hands?
I have to say that Dennis expressed it so beautifully. I'm Mori Rabbi. I have to say that there was one question, and there has been over the years, of the people who have been anti-Zionist and who have approached me, and I do not want to point fingers at anybody that anybody knows, because I know too many, and approached me as a person who was perpetuating a fascist state, an apartheid state. Because I live here, because my children live here, because my children went to the army, my husband went to the army, and all the other things that I have to say is that we paid the price that the diaspora Jew has not. And we need their understanding that to do a anti-Zionism means that you are cutting yourself off from all of the Jews here. And I would like to see a Zionism that would take into account all of us, and that that no one would say that I am not a legitimate part of the Jewish people and you aren't legitimate, because it's Am Yisrael. You hear the words here, it's not just Medinat Yisrael, it has to be Am Yisrael. And it has to be the consciousness of living in peace and cooperation with our neighbors, that everyone tries to foster these high ideals, and that Zionism is a new Zionism, because the old Zionism really only dealt with us. And I would like to see it deal with everybody who is a citizen. And I think that Shlomi meant to say, or somebody meant to say, Palestinians, not just Israeli Arabs, not just Israeli Druze, or not just Israeli Bedouins. That we're talking about when we go across the green line, either way into Gaza or into the West Bank, you're talking about Palestinians. And those are the people that are problematic for most of the old Zionists, because they didn't, and I've heard it said, they didn't get trucked away in 1948 and leave us with this whole nice empty area. And I would like people to support me in my life here, is trying to support everybody's efforts to enfranchise people who are not enfranchised, and to give equal rights to people who have some rights, but not all. And that would be my hope, that would be the support I would get from everybody abroad.
Thank you, Gail. Shlomi, a new Zionism.
Well, I think that a new Zionism would be a rearticulation using Jewish Kaplanian language of Zionism, stating what it should be and can be, rather than how to justify the current state. It's actually, I'm not sure we spoke enough about it, but Kaplan was one of the last giants who actually wrestled with the question, with the big question of that actually were formed in Europe at the end of the 19th century of the future of the Jewish people, that brought about Zionism and so on and so forth. And they were seeking the purpose for this whole enterprise and the meaning of it. They were seeking redemption, if you will. The Zionism we've known in the last 50 years probably has been pretty much a defense of Israel's right to exist, or the right for Israel's national movement to exist. And there was really no conversation, no meaningful conversation about its purpose, its meaning, its vision, its ethos, its destiny. We got to bring back that conversation. We got to re-envision the Zionist utopia as something to aspire for and work for. What is very important, I'm going to say something that may sound a little surprising to some of you, but American Jewry should seek independence from the Israeli dominance in setting the Jewish people's agenda. For too long, American Jews basically let Israel set the course, and its leaders claim, like the current one, that they're the prime minister of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, Israelis are locked in the nationalistic paradigm, and in that sense, all of Kaplan's concerns and fear regarding nationalism and more have surfaced. In that sense, and this would be my sort of my final appeal or call, but I find it part of the humor of history, because I remember that one of the classic Zionist claims in the past was that you're not really a true Zionist unless you make Aliyah. Nowadays, I believe the hope to redeem Zionism resides outside its borders and within its local opposition. What I'm really saying to you guys is that Zionism is too important to leave to the Israelis. And the age for American Zionism is here. Will American Jews, will you rise to the challenge? That's the questions. That's the question that I want to leave you with.
Thank you, Shlomi. Barbara.
Shlomi, I really appreciate your closing in that way. And before I say anything, I want to note that this was not my question. This was actually Jeffrey's question initially, and I want to give appreciation to Jeffrey for
Thank you for
sharing it.
getting that. So I apologize for that.
But it's interesting, Shlomi, that's where you ended, because where I begin with this question is, if Zionism is about the state of Israel, its existence, and the type of state it is, then I, as part of the Jewish people, and in a way responding to what Dennis said, I am an ally with those who are in the streets. And I envision the answer to this question coming from you. And so what I think what this underlies is the importance of the conversation. And if Kaplan gave us anything, it was the importance of that conversation. We didn't get to talk about Israel-diaspora relations, which I had the great blessing to be working on in the 90s when I was in Israel and for the past 20 years as well. And I'm with Gail in saying Israelis are Jewish in the deepest sense, even if they call themselves secular. And we could have a long conversation about what those Hebrew words mean. But I am in awe. There was just an article in the New York Times last week about a very prominent singer who's appealing to everyone in Israel, very popular singer, Yishai, I think, is who's Orthodox. I'm not sure what flavor, not Haredi, but he's singing to secular audiences. That's the kind of thing that is happening in Israel on the ground every day. The Hebrew language, the literature. Israel has created and continues to create a flourishing Jewish culture that is indigenous and organic. And also, we as Americans have created a very intentional Jewish culture. So for those who said Judaism is different in both of these places, it's because we have to find it and build it and create it for ourselves. And for Israelis, you can be comfortable and surrounded by that culture. I think it's got to be a conversation that continues and should be able to continue with all of the ways that we have to travel and speak to each other across the miles to develop this sense that I think could renew actually what Kaplan talked about. And what I want to leave with is something I think that Shlomi also said, creating the idea of a new Zionism, a new Zionism, which is pluralistic, has to be an aspiration, regardless of how realistic it seems. And that's an important piece to keep in mind, that we can keep aspiring to something, even if at this moment we have questions about how it might come to be.
Michael, I'm going to come in for just 1 second, if that's okay. Have we completed our rotation?
Right now.
Okay, so first I want to, in the same spirit of B'Shem Omro, B'Shem Omra, and to mention my indebtedness to Rabbi Barbara Penzner and her very important article in Kaplan and Us about Kaplan's New Zionism Reconsidered. It's interesting for me to think about the lines of that dialogue and where we're coming out today. So Toda Rabah, Barbara. I want to respond to a couple quick questions that were part of in the chat room, but likely to be overlooked because they weren't as front and center as the ones you've responded to, panelists, so beautifully. One is a comment from Daniel Resnick from Pittsburgh. And he does what I wish we had another half hour to do. He listened deeply to Rabbi Dennis Sasso's comment about nationalism and what it would be like to think of ourselves as Jewish in the same way Irish and Italian. And then he raises a whole bunch of questions about the similarity of the metaphor and the differences that are illuminating. And I encourage you to go take a look at that and think about it as well. So thank you for that. I also want to recognize a comment that could easily be missed that came from Rabbi Bob Gluck. And he wondered whether somehow the optimism about Israel and Zionism is related to Kaplan's general optimism about life in America and the fate of Western civilization. I tend to think it is. I had never thought about that before. So I want to tell you and see if that resonates for you as you take away many different insights from the webinar. Finally, I'm going to speak both in the name of James Susswine, the president of the Mordecai Kaplan Center for Jewish People, and for myself as the executive director. There have been 3 or 4 side comments that asking about the politics within reconstructing Judaism, about being pro or anti-BDS and the way we've taken stands. I want to be clear who the we is. The Kaplan Center is a platform for thought and ideology, and to review the things the way we're doing today. We would never think of speaking for reconstructing Judaism. So some of those questions, I would encourage people to be in touch, particularly with Rabbi Maurice Harris, who has done some really important work about reconstructing Judaism, Zionism today, and the political dimensions. And I recognize how blurred those categories can become in our mind. After all, I'm guessing 2/3 of the people on this call have strong connections to reconstructing Judaism. But I just want to explain that the non-response, at least from me, to those questions is out of humility, in the sense that it's not mine or ours at the Kaplan Center to respond to. As we've done, we can ask ourselves in the panel, what would Kaplan say? What would be an authentic Kaplanian response? But we can't answer for why people have aligned themselves in various ways in relationship to reconstructing Judaism. We honor the questions and direct you to reconstructing Judaism for a deeper dialogue about that. Jane, I hope you agree with that. I didn't send you a side message. I just, we're usually in sync about things, so.
I posted Rabbi Maurice Harris's contact info in the chat for those who want to contact him about questions regarding Israel relations and reconstructing Judaism.
Right. We're not afraid of controversy, but we want to be clear about where we have a particular stake and where the conversation ought to be going on elsewhere. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to mute again and see if you...
You're muted, Jeff.
So we're now at 2:32. So we're at the point, this is a long time to sit for a Zoom call. So those who want to leave, well, you're always free to leave, but if you want to leave, you may leave. And those who want to stand for a more informal conversation for a bit more time, you're invited to do that as well. Before we say goodbye to someone they're going, I really want to thank Gail, Dennis, Barbara, and Shlomi for their participation today, for their insights, for their provocative thoughts. I also want to thank Jeffrey and Jane and Caitlin for all they do up front and behind the scenes at the Kaplan Center. And also Mel is on the screen here. Mel does tremendous help for us in terms of all of this. So we're kind of in an informal period now. You can put questions in the chat if you want to raise your hand. Feel free, and we'll see where we go and where we end.
Michael, I received a note from Mel saying that he would love to offer a few thoughts during this informal period. So Mel, I hope you're still on, and we're ready to listen to your comments.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I think I'm grateful to everybody that has been a discussion on a very, very high level. And my own sense is that Kaplan is eternally relevant because of his vocabulary. And that vocabulary includes the primacy of ethics. Rabbi Sasso pointed out the sense in which the ethics of the individual and the ethics of the nation are related. And a number of people have referred to the religion of ethical nationhood. And in that book, Kaplan deals centrally with the matter of collective security. And he advocates really something that appears in the diary very early on. He advocates some kind of disarmament as the only way in which the Jewish nation, that is to say Israel, can be safe. And I think that needs to be explored further. But he had the idea that over and above the state, Kaplan is not a statist in the 30s, before the establishment of the state. He was one of the people who saw Zionism not essentially as a state. And what emerges is that he has the idea of Jewish civilization standing at the top. So whatever form Zionism takes, it should be measured against the fundamental values of Jewish civilization, which are justice and mercy and, of course, the primary modern values of pluralism, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to have a conversation with our rabbi, which will be here on May 17th on my latest thinking about Kaplan. So you will be informed about that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mel.
Kaplan Center will provide you with the link to that conversation.
Yes.
Caitlin, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I think Mel might actually be able to comment on this, but I also wonder if Michael or Gail might be able to comment on this. My question kind of involves Foucault, so I don't know if you're going to be familiar with the concepts I'm talking about, but my question involves Kaplan's concept of peoplehood, but also Foucault's concept of the panopticon. And the spoken hub model is interesting to me, particularly because the way I see it, orthodoxy and orthodoxy's model of behavior via halakha seems to function in a way nowadays, especially in Israel, as a way of covertly and also subtly influencing people's behavior. And I wonder if this creates alienation in people's attachment to Judaism as a civilization, because there are all kinds of forms of behavior that need to be covered up, need to be put out of sight, or cannot be exposed in front of other people because of halakha and the Jewish state. What are your thoughts on that? And the fact that the way that the Jewish state is constructed, the assumption is that we have to provide, kind of a kosher model where everybody needs to kind of endorse and comply with these rules, no matter what their religious practice is.
I was waiting for Michael to talk. Shlomi, אתה לא רוצה.
בבקשה, Gail.
You should have another seminar. I think that there is a problem of conceptualization from where you sit and where I sit. That it is not a monolithic Orthodox community. They range from Satmar, who is the ultimate anti-Zionist group, to those people who are waving flags and who are out in the streets that claim that secular Judaism is what should be the way that Israel is run, because we, although we didn't elect them, we are the majority. So it is too big a question, but I again have to say that the monolithic aspect of Orthodoxy, which doesn't happen in the United States and everybody knows, is just the same here. The difference is if they are in the political parties that represent these Orthodox groups are in power, then they try to convince everybody that they are the ones that should control what you bring into the hospital on Pesach. I know this sounds horrible, but this is the problem. And most Israelis, I don't want to say they don't give a shit, but they don't give a shit. And that's the real bottom line, that this is another seminar. Jeff, you ever want to do that, boy? That's a big one. I don't think we can answer that question now, but thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Gail. Carolyn Mim, your hand up.
Hi, it's me. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see all of you. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Gail. Hi, Dennis. I see the issue of new Zionism as a diaspora issue, because Israel is going to be Israel. They're going to work out among themselves Who's going to control this country? The real question I see, and I think Gail put her finger on it at one point when she mentioned her son who's living in Dallas. And I hate to sound like Daniel Gordis, so excuse me. But frankly, I mean, God forbid I should sound like Daniel Gordis, right? But frankly, from where I sit, the vacuity of Jewish life in this country is such a heavy lift right now. It is so puffed up with self-righteousness about saving the world. It is so ignorant of Yiddishkeit. People don't know Hebrew. People don't know text. People don't know history. And if you talk about Jewish peoplehood, they don't know what you're talking about. And if you talk about Zionism, they say, oh, we don't like them. Or even more offensively, we have matured to our anti-Zionist whatever. And it's very troubling. We have failed to educate our Jews in anything except religiosity, personal religiosity, and tikkun olam. And the result is we don't know who we're talking to when we've lost that connection where when we try to talk to Israelis, we're on different planets. We're on different planets. Until we get to be on the same planet, we are not going to be able to formulate this new Zionism. And I think right now is a very, very crucial point for seeing that. I mean, look at frankly, the Reconstructionist synagogues today, and who's talking about Israel? And if so, are they talking what we'd like to hear? I mean, the gap is getting bigger and bigger in the liberal community to the point that it's a chasm. And I'm really worried about that and feels very alienated myself. I was sitting in shul yesterday and said, I hate to say it, but I think I'd rather be in Jerusalem right now and go to the demonstration. But, it's like, I just felt, why are we not talking about Israel right now? Okay, I've had my say.
Carol, thank you. I want you on our next panel. So just
I'm
know
Mim,
that.
I'm not Carol. I'm Mary.
Oh, Mim, sorry. Mim, I want you on our next panel then, for sure. Thank you. Jane, last question, comment. So take it away.
Unmute. Thank you, Esther. I will, in addition, I want to add one of the values that of Kaplan. I had the privilege of transcribing conversations that Mel had with Kaplan and his daughters and his colleagues. And one of the values that comes out very strongly is his ecological sense of the imperative to take care of the earth. He thinks Ralph Nader is one of the most religious people. More religious than he. And this was in 1972. So Michael, had caps off to the work you're doing with Arava. And I also want to thank, I mean, this was a mind-blowing experience. The thought, the preparation, the insights that all of our panelists and participants have had is wonderful. And I hope we can find ways of continuing this very, very important conversation. So thank you all. And hope to
Jane,
see
I'm
you again soon,
going to do
November.
our 1-2 tag team event here and add my thanks. You wouldn't know this, but I am in Flagstaff, Arizona, where the air is thinner. And I must confess, in the beginning of the panel, when I said, there is such wisdom and perspective here, that's why I don't want to over concentrate on titles and past achievement. I didn't know I was right, but now I know I was right. There was extraordinary depth of insight and exchange. And I thank all of my colleagues. They don't know yet. They can always say no, but a new innovation we have at the Kaplan Center is to follow our webinars with the Talmud page, where our panelists can respond again in a very brief way to the ikar, to the essence of what their message is. And you'll hear from me around that issue for sure. I do want to note that this is, as Jane mentioned, this is the last of our 8 webinars this year. We've had over 900 people register for our webinars. We've been delighted. We are working, the board met and are working on next year's set of webinars. But I would like you to underline one particular date in your minds and your calendar, Sunday, November 12th, which is just 3 days after the 40th yahrzeit of Mordecai Kaplan. We have a panel called What Remains Revelatory in Kaplan's Thought with Dr. David Ellison, Dr. Arnie Eisen, and Dr. Nancy Fuchs Kramer. That is in conjunction and collaboration with Reconstructing Judaism, and it promises to be very rich. You'll hear soon about the other things going on, and I thank you for participating. We do, if Esther and Pauline have closing comments, we're still 3 minutes within our time frame. So please make those, and all the thank yous reapply at the end of that. So Esther?
Jeff, I just want to thank you for repeating the fact that the Kaplan Center is trans-denominational, because not everybody understands that. So thank you.
You're welcome. And Pauline? You need to unmute Pauline.
Thank you. I was wondering if the panelists envision a new Zionism with a Palestinian population that not only has the right to vote, but the right to run for elected office.
Yes.
Okay, panel, you're on overtime, but if you have a quick response to that, what a fine parting
Shlomi
question.
again, and then Dennis.
Yes, of course, as it should be. There's no question there. What's been wrong is the fact that it hasn't happened until now.
We have Israeli Arabs, Druze, et cetera, they vote here, obviously. It's the Palestinian population on the other side of the Green Line and in Gaza, which technically is not part of our jurisdiction anymore. I don't know. It may mean a different thing that none of us can envision now, and I wouldn't even want to say what that is. And all Jews, Israelis, diaspora Jews will have to deal with whatever comes through.
Dennis? Yeah, to repeat in part what has been said, Arab Israelis, who many of whom identify as Palestinian, are part of the political process in Israel. There are parties that are Arab Israeli parties. There are judges. There are representatives. And would the situation normalize more significantly and Palestinians would be brought into Israeli citizenship? Of course, that would be a central element of growing Israeli democracy. I want to affirm what Mim said, a very Eisensteinian statement. I think we have to proudly affirm our historic and current identity with the people and with the land and with the state of Israel. And in our congregation, we do that. We had a service this past Shabbat where we took note of the 75th anniversary. We addressed the issues that concern us, and we affirmed a hope for the future. And perhaps this would be a good way to close. Some of you may remember that the Haftarah for this Shabbat from Isaiah contained the words, Simchu et Yerushalayim vegilu ba kol ohaveha. Let us rejoice. Let time come when we can rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, and not just lament, not just mourn, but look for a future of peace. And then we sang Shir la Shalom. Lachen rak shiru shir la shalom. Al tilchashu tfilah. Lachen rak shiru shir la shalom. Bitzaka gedolah. Don't just sing. Don't just pray. Shout out the shalom of the land. So with that hope and with gratitude for the opportunity of sharing, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dennis, for that final word, and thank you everyone for participating, and all the best and happy counting of the Omer.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Mim.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you,
Thank you.
Michael.
Wonderful way to
Going
end.
to Israel in June with all my family. Post-barn bat mitzvah celebration for the
Mazal tov.
kids.
Grandchildren, oh.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, I'm going to sign us off with, again, Hamon Todah. So much thanks for such a rich discussion. Panelists, I'll be back in touch with you. Thank you, as will Jane.
Thank you, Jeff.
Very
Thank you,
rich.
Michael, and thank you all at
Thank
Jane,
you, Gail.
all at the center.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Barbara.
Great to see you, Mim.
Always
Okay,
good to see you,
cool.
Barbara. Keep it
Thank
up.
Thanks
you.
once again.
Are you really retiring?
Well,
Me?
from my congregation.
Okay, have to talk.
Yeah, I'd love to. Let's
She's
set
a
up
young
time.
retiree.
Oh,
Yeah.
people are all so young.
Okay. Caitlin Hayes, I'm sorry about the time
Here, say
mix-up.
hello to
I'm glad
Sandy if
you're
you didn't
here.
before.
Hi, Sandy.
Yeah, so Jeff, the email slipped by, and the thing is that I have the Kaplan Center webinar list posted by my calendar.
Yeah.
So I looked at the list and I set an alarm and I said, I'm gonna be ready. I'm gonna have my plaplaylist ready. I'm gonna be good to go for 3. And then
Yeah.
I woke up, I checked my email. And I went, "Oh my
I
God."
apologize for that. Way back in the early part of the year, we adopted the time, and everything we've sent since, it said 1 p.m. But if you take us true to our word, we should have noted that. But don't let go of those things. We'll find a way of sharing them. And thanks for your great questions.
Yeah, I'm glad that I was able to join and that I didn't get on too late. I felt such a sinking feeling when I checked my inbox and you asked if I was on. I was like, oh my gosh,
don't worry.
what happened? Okay, Baruch Hashem that I ended up being able to make it. Oh my goodness.
Very good. Dennis
Thank
and
you all.
Sandy, so nice to see you.
Nice to
Have a
see
wonderful
you.
celebration. We sent some greetings, but Deb ends up sending greetings to both of you as well. What a wonderful event. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Kol Tuv.
You know how to get out of there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, people are figuring it out. So long.